What's up, and welcome to Clarity for Parents of Athletes, bringing you stories from professional athletes about their parents and how they were raised. My name is Gabe Nosair from aclearmind.com. Not many of us ski at 50 miles an hour, and fewer of us race others at that speed while turning at sharp angles and going over blind jumps. But this is the life of a competitive ski cross athlete, and I was privileged to have spoken with Ashleigh McIvor DeMerit, who was a world champion in that event, as well as a gold medalist in the 2010 Vancouver Winter Olympic Games. Her journey as an athlete is extremely inspiring and shows what happens when athletes come from a place of love in their sport instead of ego. As always, we talk about how her parents approached their relationship with her as an athlete, and we even touch on Ashleigh's view on how she and her husband, former U.S. men's national soccer team player DeMerit, are approaching parenting their son Oaks during his journey as an athlete. Now, as with all my interviews with the athletes, please make sure and listen to the end for my takeaways where I dig a bit deeper into the interview and offer some more clarity on how to best parent your athlete. Enjoy. All right, so Ashleigh, thanks first of all for being here. Now, Angie, my wife, and I were very blessed to go up and work at your husband Jay's camp, the Rise and Shine camp up in Pemberton. And on our way from Vancouver to Pemberton, we stopped in Whistler at your place, and I was chatting with Jay and his dad, and I learned a new term, and I'd like for you to define this term in your perspective, and that term is a Whistler kid. So what is a Whistler kid, and what was it like growing up as a Whistler kid?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me join you here.
Of course.
And Whistler kid, well, growing up here was, it was kind of a unique situation in the 80s. I was one of the first generations to be born and raised in Whistler. And I was the first generation, one of the first kids. And we pretty much spent our lives outside playing in the forest and on the mountains, skiing and biking. And, much like, kids in many rural communities. But the difference being that it was a blossoming resort town. And, back in the day, it was quite different from now, but it was still it was becoming a very popular tourist destination. And so everything has always been very focused on outdoor recreation and, living the dream, as we say.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of extreme sports, I imagine, with the mountain right there.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, that's what draws most people to this town is the skiing and the snowboarding. And then more recently, the mountain biking in the summer. And it's actually become a year-round 4-season resort in about the last decade. And it's an interesting personality type that's drawn to Whistler. And then those who you hear often of people who come for a week and then they've been here for 7 years or something.
Right.
That's an even more interesting personality type to abandon all more practical career options and, leave their families in Ontario or wherever they've grown up and decide to make a life in Whistler. Because, it's hard. It's hard to make a living. You have to be very creative and you have to make a lot of sacrifices, mostly financially speaking, to pursue your passions. And, those passions being extreme sports. It's definitely like a sort of, the type of personality that's an adrenaline junkie and just thrives on the thrill of going really fast and taking risks. And So it's quite a it's quite a fun mix of people who make Whistler home.
Mm-hmm. And so did your family relocate there, or were they raised there, or tell me how they got there?
My parents were prairie kids. They both grew up in Manitoba, where we still have a beautiful family cabin on a lake. But they moved here in 1980. They were just, kind of wanting to be ski bums. And my mom basically walked into the healthcare center here and said, there are a lot of young families flocking to town. The mountain at the time was subsidizing the cost of real estate to encourage young families to move here so they could staff the resort.
Mm.
And my mom said there are going to be a lot of babies born here in the next, number of years, and you need a public health nurse. And because she was a public health nurse, and they pretty much created a job for her, and she held that position for 25 years before eventually going back to Manitoba and doing her master's, and then working for in a similar field, but out of Whistler eventually. But my dad started a log home business in the early 80s and built our first house in a neighborhood called Tapley's Farm, which was just, literally all families with kids. And it was so cool. They just, tell us to, head out the door, and then they'd, tell us what time we should come home for dinner, and we'd just be running around with 30 or 40 or 50 kids.
Wow, how cool.
All afternoon, evening, playing in the woods, damming up the river, building bridges, and then, riding our bikes and building forts, all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So here where I live in New Mexico, I talk to a lot of people my age with kids, and we remember playing with kids in the streets. And actually, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and I played in the streets with kids and friends. But now it seems like these days everyone is so much more enclosed in what they're doing in their own home, and you don't see children playing in the streets as often as when I grew up. How is it up in Whistler these days compared to when you grew up?
Mm-hmm. There are actually two little neighborhoods in addition to the one that I grew up in that were developed ahead of the Olympics. One as employee housing. It's subsidized and has a cap on the appreciation, so it stays affordable for locals who work for businesses that are part of the Whistler Chamber of Commerce. And then the other one is that it was athletes housing during the Olympics, and then went onto the Whistler Housing Authority into their program. Same sort of thing, where you have to be on their list, working for a local business to be able to buy in. And then, like I said, I think the appreciation is capped at about 3%. So, which is, nothing compared to what our market has seen here as far as appreciation over the last decade.
Mm-hmm, I bet.
So those two communities, in addition to the one that I grew up in, like those two neighborhoods, are pretty much exactly like Tapley's Farm was when I was little, because it's all young families with kids who are, working locally, and it's not a neighborhood. They're not neighborhoods full of weekend warriors who work in Vancouver and just come up for the weekend, and their house sits empty all week. So it's really cool to see those neighborhoods pop up, and just sort of just watch the kids growing up just like I did in Tapley's Farm. On Halloween they actually have those 3 designated neighborhoods where all of the kids go. And because you actually know people are going to be home and handing out candy, and it's going to be safe, and there are a number of parents to keep an eye on the kids collectively, and so it's a bit of history repeating, and it's just sort of expanded, but still pretty small scale.
So even with electronics these days, kids are outside still playing up there.
For sure, yeah, and Halloween's just one example of it, but it's for sure it's like same idea where, all the parents keep an eye on all the kids.
That's awesome. So a nice community feeling up there.
Definitely.
So take me through your journey in sports. How old were you? Everything, all the sports that you played, everything that you did.
Okay, well, I was on skis basically as soon as I could walk. just skiing down snowbanks in our front driveway or skiing down the carpeted stairs into our living room and in my diaper.
Nice.
And then I guess I must have been pretty fearless because I broke my leg for the first time when I was 5 playing bumper cars on skis on the mountain.
Wow.
Skiing into my buddies for fun.
Awesome.
And and then I got into and I started biking kind of probably around then, which is crazy because the kids these days are on those little run bikes with no pedals.
Right.
Yep. And so they're like, Whistler kids are actually on bikes with pedals by the time they're 3 because they're so used to running around with those little run bikes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure I was 5 when I finally dropped the training wheels off my bike. So that seems really old, relatively speaking. But then, I kind of was into skiing in the winter, mountain biking in the summer, and water skiing and wakeboarding and all that at our summer cabin in Manitoba. But I started ski racing when I was about 10 years old. And it's funny because my mom really thinks I should write a book, but I'm pretty sure everyone's mother thinks that their kid should write a book.
Well, you've had some unique experiences.
I have. But so she decided she should just start writing it for me. And she was talking about, the first time I went through a race course and that I just loved it and it was so much fun. And it's funny because I look back on it and I was like, no, that was not fun. Like I remember just hating it and just dreading going to the race course. And all my buddies on my ski team would get so excited about it. And I just was I think I was just so nervous. I didn't thrive on competition the way they did. And I think naturally I'm not, as competitive as as you'd assume most Olympic medalists should be. But I just loved the days where it snowed way too much to go to the race course, and we would just be skiing powder and kind of racing each other from the top of the mountain to the bottom through gullies and off cliffs and in the trees and like days where it wasn't quite so structured. And so when I got further into the alpine racing, it was when I was about 16. I broke my leg really badly in our Canadian nationals. And that was, I'd had several injuries between the broken leg at 5 and then the broken leg at 16. We won't go into all of those. That would take way too long. But that one, when I was 16, like my leg was literally pointing 180 degrees in the wrong direction. Like super bad series of tibial fractures. So then that was kind of the end of the alpine ski racing. I was pretty over it at that point anyway, and I just felt like it was too much sacrifice, too much of a time commitment. I was missing out on too many other fun things. When weighed up against how much I was loving it. And so I stopped ski racing then and started, just focusing on graduating high school with good grades. That was always a big priority in our household and my world. And, so I could get into a good university. And then it was the following year, just free skiing with my buddies, like I love to do, and doing some shooting with photographers and kind of thinking I'd like to be a pro skier. I'd love to be able to just get paid to go, film and ski for photographers and, have sponsors that pay me if, I get their shots in magazines and that kind of thing. And it was some friends during that phase who convinced me to try ski cross, because it was this new sport that, we could watch on TV at the X Games. And at that time it was 6 racers going head to head over huge jumps and bank turns. And, basically everything. It was just like this organized version of what we Whistler kids had been doing for fun our whole lives. Like when I mentioned racing my buddies from the top of the mountain to the bottom, like head to head racing in its purest format. And so I decided I wanted to try that. And I remember telling my parents, I think I'm gonna, and I was going to university at the time. I was commuting from Whistler to Vancouver to go to UBC, University of British Columbia. I didn't want to live in Vancouver, so I had set my courses up so they were 3 days a week. And Tuesday was like a 14-hour day solid at school. And then, every once in a while, like some Tuesday nights I'd sleep, in a friend's dorm room and at the school there, or with my aunt and uncle nearby. But for the most part, I was commuting from Whistler 2 hours each way so that I could ski. That's how much I loved skiing and how passionate I was about it. And so it was at that time that I said, Mom and Dad, I think I'm going to try this new sport called ski cross. And my dad said, no way, that's way too dangerous. You need to get back into traditional alpine ski racing. He had been a ski racer as a kid, but, didn't go as far with it as he would have liked to, and, didn't realize his full potential, and, watched me not realizing my full potential in alpine ski racing, and was encouraging me to pursue that. And I said, well, I think, thanks for your input, but I think I'm going to go anyway to this ski cross race in Northern California. It was an X Games qualifier. And my mom said, okay, I'm coming with you. and my mom's always, they're both very supportive of whatever I want to do. But my mom in particular was kind of like, yeah, if you want to try it, I'm not going to let you drive down there by yourself. I'll go with you. And we drove 22 hours to North Star at Tahoe. And unfortunately, I had another injury in training there. I dislocated my shoulder just pulling out of the start gate. I think that was probably the 10th or 15th time I had dislocated my shoulder.
Oh, wow.
And I just remember thinking, and my mom was totally like, no problem. We'll just watch the race and cheer and drive home. And I just, and I didn't by any means feel like I'd be letting her down if I didn't race, but I think it's a lesson in like, unwavering support and, making sure that I never felt any pressure. My mom was so good at that. But, still I guess from within, I wanted her experience. Like I wanted her drive all the way down there and time off work and all that to be worthwhile. I didn't want it to all be for nothing. And I really wanted to race. And so I iced my shoulder and took a bunch of ibuprofen and didn't do any training runs, and pulled out of the start gate with one arm, and couldn't even, like at that time, the starts of ski cross races involved a lot of pushing with your poles, like poling and skating. And so I was like, poling with one arm, kind of keeping my right arm tucked in. And all the, at that time is down to 3 women competing head to head against me. So 4 total. And so the 3 of them were out of the start gate way faster than I was, and to the first corner way ahead of me. And then I managed to catch them and pass them in every single heat and win every single heat and qualify for the X Games. And my mom always talks about how it was just crazy driving home, that I had like, sponsor after sponsor calling me, wanting me to get on their skis or their helmets or their goggles or whatever. And so it was kind of, that's what sort of kick-started my career.
So, it's interesting. I hear these stories a lot where the parents sometimes, one has that unwavering support and the other is maybe putting a little bit more pressure. It sounds like you may have felt that from your dad a little bit more. So when you first told him you wanted to do ski cross and he was kind of trying to guide you back into doing alpine, you said it was kind of coming from his lack of what he didn't have earlier. And I see that a lot in parents that I've coached and on that, and I've seen in the soccer field and on the sidelines, and that I've seen in other sports as well. With my daughter, she played water polo and rugby. So I see that a lot in parents, and I think that a lot of children don't have the strength to tell their parents, no, I don't want to do this, and I'm going to do this instead. And it sounds like you did. So how was that experience for you in telling your dad, no, I really want to do the ski cross?
I think that a lot of it was fueled by my mom's unwavering support. And my mom was so adamant that they were not going to put pressure on my sister or me, that my dad kind of had to follow suit. And I could sort of feel it coming, coming from him here and there. But, he's a very spirited person. I just kind of realized that recently. But he's also very rational. And, he agreed with my mom rationally that he should not be putting pressure on me or, trying to force me into anything. Guiding is a good word. I do believe he was trying to guide me back to alpine, and it wasn't even necessarily anything he was saying beyond that one comment. It was just this vibe that I got from him. But because of that, I knew that he'd be on board with whatever decision I made. And it was almost like a playful, like, then when I did see success in ski cross, I was kind of like, I told you so, Dad. Like, good thing I didn't get back into alpine.
Mm-hmm.
And then, then the other side of it too is, his argument was not very relevant in my opinion. Really, because statistically, ski cross isn't actually any more dangerous than alpine, and we've all learned that over the years. It just seems crazier visually, but there are just as many injuries in alpine ski racing. To your point of, I think it is common that a lot of parents try to kind of live vicariously through their kids, and definitely my dad, being a prairie kid, was really into hockey, really into ski racing, and his parents were way more supportive of the hockey because they just didn't understand skiing. They'd never felt it. They'd never, they couldn't relate to, the exhilarating feeling of throwing yourself down a mountain on two planks. And so I guess, kind of like my dad thinking ski cross seemed crazy, his parents thought skiing in general was crazy.
Right. So he had that experience as well, kind of like you did, with a little bit of pressure from his parents.
Yeah. And it was, pressure to focus on hockey, and then like a complete lack of support when it came to the ski racing eventually. I think probably because it was expensive too. As a prairie kid, he'd have to be training out west and all that. But I do think that that's like, big part of my dad's life, goals were to provide my sister and me with those opportunities that he wasn't provided with. So I will be forever grateful for that.
That's awesome.
And then my dad's, like, any competitive genes, we say, came from my dad, and my mom was always all about participating. Still is. Yeah.
Well, you need that balance in life, and that's what I'm realizing just in general in every aspect is that balance, especially of the masculine and the feminine. Not that just males are masculine and females are feminine, but within everybody we have that. We have both sides.
Definitely.
And I can see that a lot of highly competitive athletes such as yourself can sometimes be overdriven by the ego of the masculine side of things, where I believe it's possible the other side is to do things out of love and understanding the journey. But it seems like a lot of parents come about raising their athletes a little bit too much from the driven side of things and not enough from the balance. But it sounds like you were very blessed to have that balance.
Definitely.
So first of all, I've got to know, what's the speed difference between somebody doing alpine versus somebody doing ski cross?
Alpine's typically, like, downhill will be way faster, upwards of 100 kilometers an hour. I'm Canadian, so I think upwards of 60 miles an hour. But ski cross, we'd maybe have like one turn on one of the race courses that's like, downhill speed or super G speed, the one sort of one step down from downhill. But for the most part, we're more like, 60, 70, 80 kilometers an hour. So it's a little bit slower, but it's definitely like, crazy added risk factor with the massive errors and 3 other athletes with razor sharp edges and poles that are kind of like spears in their hands. So definitely a risky sport. And I do get offended though when people refer to it as, like roller derby on skis. Like, we're not like out there to push each other over or take each other out. That's a completely different sport. We're it's more calculated than people would think. But yeah, I think of course the risk factor is part of what we all love about it, and it's that adrenaline rush and that feeling when you get to the finish and it's all gone smoothly and you've had a good race.
Yeah, it sounds like you didn't have that with alpine skiing, the adrenaline rush as much.
I guess I think the issue with alpine skiing for me was that it had become so structured. And I was a teenager trying to do all sorts of other things and learn about what was important to me and, you know, identify my passions truly. And I was missing a lot of school for the alpine ski racing. Like we were in school 3 days a week and traveling, training, racing 4 days a week in the winter. And yeah, it was just like I said, like a lot of sacrifice and you know, coaches telling me where to be, what to do all the time, and I just didn't do well with that. I was a little bit more free spirited, and so when I got into ski cross, it was more like a party circuit. To be honest, it wasn't an Olympic sport at the time, and the circuit was you know, funded by the large manufacturers. It was a pro tour. And there was prize money and, like, you know, music blasting in the finish line and a bunch of cool free-spirited athletes that didn't, you know, had also decided they didn't like how disciplined alpine was. And you know, and then eventually, and so that, I mean, I just loved it. I had so much fun. And I remember saying that I would be doing this if it were costing me money. And I worked really hard, you know, all summer long before my first ski cross season, and you know, paid for it all myself, and you know, thought I needed to save a whole bunch of money up to do it. And then, you know, in the end, I ended up making money doing it, winning prize money. And so it was cool to, you know, be doing something I love so much. I would be spending money on it, but actually, you know, generating some revenue from it.
Yeah.
And then it kind of, it became, then I kind of, like, I was kind of in and out of it for a couple of years because I wanted to focus on my university stuff. And then I just, you know, I got to the point where I wasn't really loving the pressure of, you know, sponsors and all that. And I actually quit racing ski cross. So it was the second time I quit ski racing to go and join a crew of Whistler people in Mexico and surf all winter. And I thought I would just hit the big races, like the X Games and the ones that the sponsors really cared about, and kind of put minimal effort in and make minimal sacrifices. And I learned a hard lesson there that, you know, like, it's kind of an all or nothing sport.
Right.
I think any adrenaline fueled extreme sports, or you have to be very strong and fit to avoid injury. And of course I got hurt at the X Games. I blew my knee. And then I did come back once they put it in the Olympics. So it was a couple of years of partying in Whistler and skiing powder and riding my bike and trying to do the pro skier thing with photographers and filmmakers and all that. And a little bit of schoolwork here and there. And then the announcement came that ski cross was going to be added to the Olympic program. And so from there, that was, you know, my second comeback in the sport. And then eventually it did become way more structured than the alpine ski racing I'd left because it was too structured. But I knew that, you know, I'd grown up. I was more mature and I had experienced all sorts of other things. And I knew, you know, that I could put other things on hold for this tiny little window of time, a big opportunity to potentially represent my country in the Olympics at home. Like, it was announced that the Olympics would be in Whistler, Vancouver. And so at that time, I knew that that was an opportunity I needed to make the most of, because I had all of these skills I developed as an alpine athlete and then on the pro tour racing ski cross that would be going to waste if I didn't give it a shot. And I felt like, you know, it's like my dad, you know, quitting alpine ski racing at the age of 14. You know, I hadn't realized my full potential in the sport, and I had dedicated so much of my life to it. And I just knew that it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. The Olympics were at home. It was going to be the debut of my sport. And it was actually in perfect timing for me to be at the pinnacle of my career. I would be 26. And so I just had a couple of years to get some World Cup racing experience under my belt, because there's a full World Cup circuit. So, you know, once they put the sport in the Olympics, that became the tour. Like, it was like, you know, traveling circus where everybody would go from one resort to the next. There are sort of 12 to 18 World Cup races each season. and then World Championships every 2 years, and then Olympics every 4 years, of course. And so it was really only 2 full seasons of World Cup racing I'd be looking at before our home games. And so from there, I actually had another really bad injury early on in that first season. I got named to the national team and had some decent results, but not great. And I remember thinking at that point that, there had been so many athletes who'd come out of the woodwork and switched from alpine to ski cross now that ski cross was an Olympic sport, and that maybe I couldn't hang, that I wasn't good enough to, be in the mix with all these new athletes who had just jumped over to our sport. And I remember feeling really discouraged that first year on the World Cup circuit. And then I finally was having a really great race, and I was winning the semifinal, looking good for heading into the final. And I dislocated my shoulder, I just hit a bump, and that I didn't see because it was flat light. It was low vis, really foggy. And I kind of flailed, like we say, rolling down the windows when you kind of, your arms go back.
Right, yeah.
Which is funny because our kids aren't going to understand what we mean when we say rolling down the windows.
Yeah, of course.
Because they just push a button to roll the windows down.
Yeah, that signal, it doesn't have the same connotation anymore.
Yeah, and so it was, basically 20 minutes in the finish, corral, trying to get my shoulder back in, and a bunch of people speaking French and all sorts of different languages, trying to figure out how to do it and why it wouldn't go back in. We tried all of the ways that it had been reduced in the past, and it was kind of gnarly. And then my coach was like, "Okay, it's back in. Can you race the final?"
Oh, wow.
I was like, "I guess so." And he was just thinking I would just pull out of the start gate, and if somebody crashed, I could sort of make my way down. And but it would have been tricky because in ski cross, the jumps are gaps. Like they're, the takeoff has a wall, like a cliff on one side. So it would have been interesting going up the ramp of the jump takeoff and, turning around the gate, going back down the ramp. And then it would have been pretty ridiculous. And the officials actually saw me on the chairlift with my shoulder in a sling and a bunch of ice on it. And they ran the final without me before I could get to the start. So anyway, my coaching team decided that I should come home and have it operated on so that I could have one full season on the World Cup under my belt before the Olympics. And it was like a full Bankart surgery, big repair. I had 5 months of recovery, rehabilitation. And then into the pre-Olympic season, I was on the podium pretty much every race and won the World Championships and qualified for the Olympic team almost a full year out of the games. So I was the one athlete who was awarded a spot on the Olympic team. Because, just because you're on the national team doesn't mean you're on the Olympic team, of course.
Right.
And I had won World Championships. I had a good result at our Olympic test event. I was second. And then I did well at our World Cup finals. And I was ranked number 3 in the world that season. And so I got that spot. And so that was just amazing from a, mental prep perspective, because I was able to focus on the Olympics, on doing well at the Olympics for almost a year more than my teammates who were focused on qualifying for the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were battling for their spots right up until 2 weeks before the games.
Wow.
So imagine the pressure that they felt. And then going into the Olympics here, I was ranked number 2 in the world. I had a bunch of great results early in the season that year. And I think that's why it all unfolded so beautifully. I was in a really good headspace and feeling confident and well supported.
Yeah. So I actually watched several times since meeting you. I've watched your final race and you basically killed it. And watching it, I watched actually a couple times last night. I felt like you won it even before the race even started, just with your body language in the start gate.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know the vocabulary, but it seems like everybody went down into the starting position. The guy said hold or something.
Yeah, skiers ready.
Yeah, you're the only one who stood up.
Yeah.
and the woman next to you, I think she was from Austria,
Got confused.
she kept peeking over.
Yeah.
So you could tell she was in a jumble. And then the two women to your right, they seemed tight. They were down in the starter's position.
Oh, yeah.
So what was it like for you leading up to that moment?
It was just such an incredible experience. Like it made me believe in a whole bunch of things I'd never even considered, like destiny and fate and karma and all these like deep rooted levels of consciousness. And I don't know, like I just felt like everything in my life had led me to that point, and all of the decisions I'd made from the heart. Like I was always big on following my heart, and and making sure I was really loving what I was doing. I had teammates racing Alpine as kids who were just obsessed with racing on the World Cup Tour and going to the Olympics. And I was like, well, this is fun. And, I was always just focused on the fun components and very creative to ensure that I was being positive. And, there was never a time in my Olympic lead up where it was like so horrible, but I felt like I really needed to power through. There were many times when I was tempted to quit because it was feeling horrible, and I would just give myself the go ahead to quit after my next training session or after my next gym workout or after the next race. I'd be like, okay, let's just do one more, and we'll reevaluate after that. And then there'd always be like this, okay, let's just one more. And, so I think because I was so focused on enjoying it, and I didn't feel like people's expectations of me were super relevant. That kind of alleviated the pressure. And so going into those games, I don't know, I had myself convinced that I'd done it all right, like all for the right reason, and all because I was truly passionate about it and really wanted it. And I definitely knew I'd worked less hard than a lot of my competitors, but to me, skipping out on a gym session often meant going for a 2-hour mountain bike ride for fun with my friends, which in retrospect is actually a way more effective method of preparing for an Olympic ski cross race than doing one more set of squats in the gym, because it's great exercise and it's the best cross training in the world. So things like that, where I was always careful to not get burnt out, and sort of, if I was feeling overwhelmed, I'd just take a step back and approach from a different angle that felt good. Allowed me to go into those games just feeling 100% prepared, and with no guilt for doing what other people would perceive to have been cutting corners. And just standing in that start gate, I felt like that course was built for me. It was built by a Canadian course builder, Jeff Iaxi, who had built a lot of our training facilities. And it was just very well suited to my skiing style. Huge jumps, some technical turns, not too much gliding. And I was used to the weather conditions, the snow conditions, all the trees and the climate. Everything felt super familiar because I'd raced there as a kid. My race was actually in Vancouver because it's technically part of freestyle. It's not part of alpine ski racing because of the big jumps. And so all the alpine stuff was in Whistler. Our ski cross race was in Vancouver at Cypress Mountain, which again was great because it still felt like home. I'd raced there as a kid racing alpine, but it was a little bit removed from like my crazy circle of friends who I love so much, who I probably would have been distracted by in Whistler. And I just felt so at home and so comfortable and at ease. And it was just, and there were like a few things that people said to me that just echoed in my mind, even just like, random fans wrote things on my Facebook wall, like, and someone said to me that morning, savor, or this is your day. And one of my friends wrote on my Facebook wall, savor every moment. And I remember just standing in the start gate there and that, waiting for the final to start, like the moment in time that you're just remembering, thinking I was built for this. I was made for this. This is my day, and savor every moment, savor how this feels. Like I had butterflies in my stomach, of course, but it was like I had butterflies to my outer extremities. And I just remember thinking, you'll never feel this crazy excitement, or, even if it's nerves, like it's channel it into something positive and you'll gain energy from it. And you'll never be this nervous for anything ever again. And I just really embraced it. And it was just, I don't know, I was in flow, ultimate flow state, I guess. And when the gate dropped, I went right onto autopilot, and I got to the finish and I didn't even know what had happened. And I remember crossing the finish line and putting my arms out and feeling like I was flying. Like it was just such a crazy, yeah. And then people always ask me, what was it like the moment you knew that you had won the Olympics? And you'd think it would be like, joy and ultimate fulfillment and just being ecstatic. And for me, it was actually a relief. And that was so fascinating to me, because it was just, it just meant that, I knew, like, my subconsciously or deep down, I knew how many people had put so much into it. And there was this crazy level of appreciation and relief that I hadn't let them all down. And then it moved into like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. What a magical experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just this crazy culmination of a lifetime of hard work, of course, but more just, striving for excellence in everything I do. And, like I said, sort of backing up and taking a different approach if it was starting to feel horrible or painful or super unpleasant. And I think just being so positive was what carried me through that. So
that's a beautiful story. The word love kept coming up to me whenever you were describing it, because you said, you were following your heart. You just wanted to have fun. You weren't worried about what other people were saying. And really the big one for me is savor every moment. And that really is essentially being present and in the moment. And that's where athletes get in the flow, where the other side is ego. And if people are too focused on, your focus in that race could have been on the other three women in that race. And that's coming from ego. That's not coming from, hey, I grew up here. I've been training for this. I love training, maybe not every single moment, but overall you loved your sport and you figured out a way to get your balance of pushing yourself and also having that mountain biking experience to kind of release your stress, but still stay fit,
Yeah. And keep on the path of progression toward the end goal without even realizing it.
Yeah. And I work with athletes and they often come from a place of ego, and sport usually goes hand in hand with that. But it seems like you were really able to focus and hone in on the love aspect in everything you were doing leading up to the Olympics.
Yeah. And maybe it is because I don't like the competitiveness within me. And so I have to, I don't know, like it's a coping mechanism for alleviating any pressure, is that I just make sure that I'm having fun with it. And, as opposed to getting too hung up on that end result that, athletes are typically super focused on. Like I've had sports psychologists talk to me about visualizing that Olympic gold over and over and over again. And there was actually a Canadian ski racer who talked to our team in the off season just before the 2010 games. And he was saying that going into the Olympics that he participated in, they released images of the medals ahead of the games. And he cut the picture of the gold medal out and he put it in his wallet and he looked at it every day. And like, that was how he, that was what he felt he needed to do. And for me, I was like, that just is so not how I operate. I remember thinking that then. And I needed to focus on everything other than that seemingly unattainable goal of winning Olympic gold, and focus on all the other amazing things I would get to do if that didn't work out for me. And I just remember feeling like the only way I would be disappointed would have been if I did something really stupid, like if I don't know, if I tried to make a pass and took myself out, and or if I don't know, if I did something really stupid, I'd have regret. And I just felt like I had done everything in my power to be prepared to go out there and perform on that day. And because of that, all I had to do was just see how it all unfolded. And if someone had cut me off, like, something completely beyond my control, because there are so many aspects that are beyond your control in that sport. If I'd just gone out there and done my best, I would be happy with whatever result came. And so I think it's almost like, the, Deepak Chopra's law of unattachment, or, reading the 7 spiritual laws of success after the Olympics. Like, oh, that's why this worked. That's why. It's like all these sort of strategies that I had already kind of embraced naturally, put into words. Oh, that's why that worked out. But I was so detached from the idea of winning Olympic gold. Like even a year before the games, I qualified, right before I qualified for them, there's an article where I'm like, yeah, I'd love to just participate and represent my country. And, like I didn't even on the morning of my race, I woke up thinking, well, first of all, I thought, oh, this is really great. It's horrible weather. It's super stormy outside. So I'll have a competitive advantage there because growing up in Whistler, we ski on storm days. Those European women have no trees. The resorts are all above tree line. So when it's too stormy, they don't even go skiing.
Oh, wow.
So I knew that would affect them more than it was going to affect me. But then from there, it wasn't like, oh, I have to go try and win the Olympics today. It was like, okay, I need to get some food into me and I need to get to the hill with all my gear. And from there, I'll think about what's next. But I'm not going to think about what's next until then. And then, did a training run, started to feel good skiing, did a qualification run. Because that Olympic final that you watched last night is the 5th race run of the day for me.
Right.
So you do a qualifying run against the clock for seeding. And if you fall in that qualifying run, you'll be one of a few girls who doesn't even get to go into the final, like into the head-to-head racing. And then, from there it was, okay, I just need to win the round of 8. So 8 heats of 4 women, 32 women. I just need to, I need to win or be second, because top 2 advance, bottom 2 are done for the day. And, and then it was only then that I thought about the quarterfinal. And then it was only once I'd won the quarterfinal that I thought about the semifinal. And then after the semifinal, I was so fired up because I just won all these heats. And, and I was having so much fun on the course that standing in the start gate and that footage that you're talking about, that's, it just kind of all naturally fell into place. And I think it's just, again, it wasn't until that moment. I didn't even in that moment think, oh, now I need to go win an Olympic gold medal. Again, it was just, I need to go and hit that, the first few features of this course really smoothly. And I can't wait to hit that jump that's halfway down that feels so good. And, I think there's a big lesson in that, in really avoiding, getting too hung up on that end goal, that end result that you're after. And like you said, focusing on the journey and sort of getting into the flow of it. And and focusing on all the other things that will be wonderful, even if it doesn't work out the way, your ego would plan it to work out.
Right. Did you ever feel too focused on the end result when you were younger, when you started racing and skiing? Did you feel pressure from parents or outside sources to come home with a medal?
That's a very good question, because no. And I think that's one thing that's quite unique about my story. And my mom talks about it a lot. And I think that I felt like I should, because I felt like my peers were very focused on results and medals, and that it was weird that I was a ski racer competing with them and that I cared so little. And that made me feel like I deserved it less. But I mean, my mom always says to people when they ask her how she got my sister and me to love skiing so much, or to be such good skiers, is a more common question. She always says, just keep it positive. If they wanted to go in for hot chocolate, we went in for hot chocolate. And so I think about that all the time with my little guy, Oaks, who just turned 3. You know, if we get all the way to the hill and he's got all his gear on finally, and it's kind of an ordeal getting a kid to a ski hill.
Oh yeah.
And up to the top of the chairlift, you know, without losing any gear on the way up. And then if he says, I don't want to put my skis on, you know, I want to go build a snowman. I go, okay. You know, or if I want to go in for hot chocolate, sure, let's go for hot chocolate. So my mom was very, very careful to keep it positive. She didn't care if we ended up being good skiers. She just wanted us to grow up to love skiing. And it's something that we still do as a family. It's such a great family activity. And then, you know, phoning home from ski races as a teenager, it was never, ever, what place did you come? It was always, so did you have fun? Both my mom and my dad were really good like that. And I don't even know if I noticed that then. It might have been later where I went, like, you know, and I saw teammates who, you know, if they had a bad race, they'd be, you know, I realize now they were scared of their dad. They were so scared to, you know, of, you know, their dad's reaction or even their mom, some of them, you know, like there were a few moms who traveled around and came to every single race and were like, you know, Tiger mom, hockey mom style, you know, and it's just not I mean, I think young athletes put so much pressure on themselves naturally, and their teammates put so much pressure on them, and then their coaches typically put a lot of pressure on them. The last place they need more pressure from is their parents.
Yeah, that's where they need that unwavering support you were talking about.
And thankfully, I had coaches who were super supportive and really good. I think that's what separates, you know, decent coaches from the best, is that ability to really hone in on each individual athlete's needs and what we respond to, and adapt. And I had the best coaches. Whistler is one of the best ski areas in the world. Of course, it attracts the best ski coaches in the world. And you know, there were a couple who were like crazy hard on some athletes, and I learned to just not take it personally and be like, okay, they're being crazy again. But for the most part, they were all just so supportive, and they learned that I was one of the athletes that needed like a tiny bit of constructive criticism, but mostly like, you know, words of encouragement and you know, almost praise, or I was going to decide I hated ski racing and quit. And my coach in the Olympics, Willie Rain, who's the son of famous Canadian ski racer Nancy Green Rain, who's been a senator more recently, and my mom's been working for her, establishing a National Health and Fitness Day.
Oh, awesome.
But her son Willie was my coach at the first international juvenile ski race I went to as a 12-year-old in Europe, alpine ski racing. So I had some experience with him there that really made it a lasting impact throughout the years, you know, without him as a coach. And then he came back into my world on the national ski cross team. And he's the one in the start gate who just, you know, leans down to my ear and says, have fun.
Nice.
He learned, you know, a lot of coaches in the start gate would be like, good luck, kill it, go, you know, like go for it. And he just learned that I needed him every time to just be like, have fun or have a blast, or, you know, like it was always just super positive. He knew that I needed to pretend I didn't care at all about the result, and I was going to go have a fun run down a beautifully built course.
So, you know, I'm glad you brought up your coach. I can imagine in an individual sport, the relationship between the athlete and the coach is pretty, you know, it can be intense. It can be intimate since you're with each other so much and the focus is just on you. Whereas in a team sport, you can somewhat hide a little bit more here and there. You know, even though the spotlight can definitely be focused on you, of course, in a team sport as well. What was your parents' relationship like with your coaches?
I mean, I had a lot of different coaches when I was in the phase of life where I lived with my parents. So it was typically, you know, I'd have one coach for a maximum of 2 years at a time, but often 1 year at a time. And I think that the thing that I valued most about my parents' relationship with them was that they relayed information to me. So my coaches would say, you know, I remember my coach, Bob Deeks, telling my parents, you know, when they were handing out talent to to youngsters or to babies or kids or something, you know, Ashleigh got a dump truck full of it or something, you know, like just, you know, or then, you know, my other coach, Craig Glenday, saying that I have this incredible touch on the snow, like this finesse, and that I'm so smooth. And then, you know, I don't know that it would have been as effective if my coach had just said these things to me, and maybe they did, they probably did. But the comments and the, I don't know, the things that stood out to me were the ones that were relayed through my parents for some reason. And so I guess, you know, that's nice that my parents took it upon themselves to talk to my coaches about me and my sport, my abilities and all that. And then relay that information, that praise, I guess. And then, you know, later on, you know, when I was on the national team as an adult, you know, young adult, my parents and coaches didn't really cross paths very often.
Right, of course. So
my parents definitely took more of a role of just sort of being my cheerleaders and my fans, and then what's interesting is, you know, you talk about coaching being a really in an individual sport being a, you know, a very you know, like with it being more one-on-one, and you can't just hide you know, behind your teammates or within the team or disappear. Your coaches are it's definitely a very intimate relationship with each of the three coaches. But what's interesting is I feel like my teammates actually ended up coaching me more than my coaches did, because they were, you know, we on the ski cross circuit, the men's and women's circuits are combined. They're you know, we race on the same course, same day, all together. You know, obviously like different categories, but we, you know, travel together, train together, race the same spots, same days. And so our training runs are often mixed, and they actually tried to separate us at one point. They tried to do, you know, 2 hours of women's training and then 2 hours of men's training. And we all lobbied to put it back together because we women, you know, women on sort of the, you know, the on top of our game on the women's side needed athletes who were better than us,
right,
to train with. And so I was always following the men down the course and training, and they'd show me the lines, and you know, there's definitely naturally a bit less fear on the men's side. And you know, ski cross is a lot about who's the most fearless, you know, who has the least fear going in. And,
right.
And so the men on my team, you know, wouldn't be scared to go and run the course top to bottom, full speed, first run. And I would just tuck in behind them. And I knew if I was going the same speed they were going, and I was watching them make it from the takeoff of the jump to the landing of the jump, that I too was going to make it.
Nice.
And it's interesting that you mentioned it being intimate, because I think a lot of the time athletes end up dating their coaches.
Oh, okay. I mean, I didn't mean that kind of intimate.
It is, though. No matter what happens, you're traveling the world together.
Yeah.
Places and these like crazy, you know, pushing comfort zones, like these exhilarating experiences together. And it's funny because a lot of the women end up dating the men on their teams in the ski cross world. I'm sure some date their coaches, but on our team, it was all an inter-team relationship.
That's another podcast we
Yeah.
So you mentioned Oaks, who just turned 3. So let's fast forward to the future, and, you know, having an Olympian mom and also a former MLS player as a dad, and not just MLS, but EPL and World Cup player as a dad. He's going to feel some sort of pressure, whether you guys say anything or not. So once he starts competitive sports, how are you guys going to approach your relationship with him as an athlete?
And I mean, Jay and I talk about this a lot. This is certainly top of mind. And we're that's why I said, you know, keep it positive. If we get to the top of the mountain and he's decided he doesn't want to ski before we've even done one run, that's totally cool. And yeah, we're definitely going to have to be careful to make sure that he doesn't feel any pressure from us, because there will be that external pressure coming in. And it's yeah, I mean, as soon as we announced that we were engaged and then that we were getting married and all that, there was like, you know, this debate on Twitter, will their future kids be soccer players or skiers, and will they compete for Canada or the US? And way in the past, before that was even
Let's get married first and then get pregnant before we decide all that.
Yeah, it's so funny. And I keep saying I want him to be a surfer so I can watch him participate in his sport from a tropical beach.
Oh yeah, sounds good.
Instead of doing what my parents did, like standing on the side of a ski hill with sleet and snow blowing sideways into their faces, like fending off frostbite to make sure our race got off, because they were always, we always needed parent volunteers in ski racing too. But yeah, I've even talked about putting him into, there's a soccer program for kids as young as 2 in Whistler. And I'm like, let's get Oaks running around with a bunch of kids chasing a soccer ball. And Jay's like, no. Jay's very perceptive, and he's noticed that he doesn't really like chasing a soccer ball around, so he's not going to push him into that. Right now, Oaks is, when you ask him what he wants to do, he wants to go to the grocery store and buy a surprise egg. That's his favorite thing to do.
That's awesome.
And like a Kinder Surprise.
That's awesome.
And then often he'll say he wants to go to the bike jumps, so I take him to the pump track. And often he'll say he wants to ski. I'll take him skiing right after this. But again, like always, just making sure to keep it positive. But it's pretty cute to see what is in his nature. He was obsessed with basketball before anything. And he would get up, like when he could barely, he just learned to crawl out of his crib. He'd wake up in the morning. There's several times when we first bought a basketball hoop, like a little Tykes one. And there's several times we'd wake up to the sound of Oaks having crawled out of his crib, shooting hoops in the living room. He'd bring his little stool over, stand up on it, and shoot hoops. Like,
that's awesome.
Over and over. And we're like, this kid trains hard. It's crazy.
Wow.
And then swimming, he's like, he'll dive down to the bottom of the pool for a toy that he's dropped down there.
Yeah.
30 times until he gets it.
Wow.
And we're like, come on, come in the hot tub, come relax. It's like, I almost feel like we're going to have to be the opposite of pressure. We're going to have to be like trying to like get his what's in his nature to, tone it down a little.
Yeah. He's a Whistler kid.
Yeah, I guess so. So far.
That's awesome. Ashleigh, if you had, let's narrow it down to 2 bits of advice for parents who are raising athletes, what would they be?
I think the biggest thing is just keep it positive. That's my most important advice. And there are other things that stem from that. But it's, it goes back to my mom saying, if your little skier kid wants to go in for hot chocolate, let him or her go in for hot chocolate. And another part of keeping it positive is that unwavering support. So make them feel like they're, proud to tell you, no matter how their race went or their soccer game or whatever, competition, how it went, because you should be their biggest fan. They should be able to count on you to be their biggest fan. And then that'll be fun for you too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, anytime you approach from that unconditional love, everything is perfect. Yeah. Awesome, Ashleigh. Thank you so much for this interview, for your time. It's really a pleasure to speak with you about this and to help parents and their athletes. Thanks so much, and take care.
Okay, see ya.
So what were your biggest takeaways? For me, my biggest takeaway was what she called unwavering support or unconditional love that she felt from her parents, especially her mom. How many times do we as parents have that idea all the time? There's that old saying, I just want you to be happy, but then there are oftentimes comes with conditions. I just want you to be happy, but this is how I want you to be happy. What Ashleigh's parents did was allow her to be her and to hold space for her, or in other words, just support her along her journey. They never put any pressure on her to win as a youth and always asked the most important questions, like, did you have fun? What this did was naturally led Ashleigh to be able to follow her heart without needing to seek approval from others. She said it herself in the interview. I didn't feel like people's expectations of me were super relevant. That's huge. When we put expectations onto children to perform what we determine to be up to our standards, we end up loving them conditionally. When they feel they have conditions to receiving love, they will live with a need to seek approval from others, from an outside source. When people do that, they live life from the outside in more often than not. They search for happiness outside themselves. They believe other people and other things and accomplishments make them happy. And when they don't have those things, that it'll make them sad. It's difficult to be in the moment as an athlete if you believe your happiness is only going to be achieved if you win. Now, Ashleigh was naturally able to savor every moment of her journey to the Olympic gold because she never focused on the outcome. She naturally welcomed all the nervous feelings that she had instead of fighting them or thinking that there was something that was negative. She naturally loved her process and journey as an athlete. There's no doubt in my mind that it was because of the lack of pressure from her parents and their lack of focusing on winning and their unconditional love that they had for her. So, do you love your children unconditionally? More importantly, do you love yourself unconditionally? If there are parts of you that you find yourself not loving, can you love yourself for feeling that way? It is not until parents can love themselves unconditionally that they can love anyone unconditionally, especially their children. Thanks for listening. I'm Gabe Nocer. If you want, you can always get in touch with me at gabe@aclearmind.com and through my social media links, which you can find on my website, aclearmind.com. Much love to you and many blessings.